Yeah, I was thinking what I was going to say to this slide, and it's like, by God, it has been 20 years of EPUB stuff this year. So when we started it, when Microsoft and Softbook Press and Nuva Media were really, that started in 98-ish. Anyhow, so maybe I'm just stubborn, been here a long while. So I'm going to give an update on the W3C, the processes we're going through and the work we're doing on EPUB and web publications, and hopefully there will be some time after. I figure this audience is probably fairly familiar with the IDPF, whence EPUB came from, but I did maybe possibly a little bit less familiar with W3C, so I threw in a couple of introductory points here. W3C predates anything that could be vaguely considered EPUB starting in '94. About 450 organizations are members at this point. And W3C standards just cover the gambit: HTML, CSS, XSL, XSLT, so forth. But if you look at those first four there, those are really the building blocks of EPUB, and I think that's one of the indications of making folding the IDPF into the W3C so sensible. W3C is an organization that actually has staff, which is quite different than where we were coming on EPUB, where we had one executive director and all the rest were volunteers. I'll get to talking about Yvonne in a moment, who you've seen in the previous talk. And so basically the W3C is focused on advancing the web platform as well as addressing specific industry needs, and publishing is a new one of those given the activities of the last several years. In May of 2016, the IDPF announced plans to explore the combination with the W3C, and in February 2017, we actually started that combination. It's getting pretty darn close to being complete, and as we exist inside the W3C, there's the Publishing Business Group, which I'll talk a little bit about each of these: Publishing Business Group, the Publishing Working Group, and the EPUB 3 Community Group. This is sort of the graphic representation of the organization of the publishing interest inside the W3C. The business group and its steering committee provides oversight for the EPUB 3 community group, where the development of the current standard is happening, and provides direction, potentially. It's more of a dotted line, I think, on the left there, to the Publishing Working Group, because we're a full-fledged working group inside the W3C doing the new technology development. And then the business group also is involved in community building, helping out to some extent with events like this, the committee programming for this, and an upcoming summit or workshop, I suppose, coming up in Japan in September on sequential art, comics, manga, and so forth. So the business group tries to represent the business interests of the publishing community inside the W3C. And so the strategic roadmap of what we're really trying to do is it comes in a couple of flavors here. Continue EPUB 3, or EPUB 2 even, is the standard now in the trade press. That's where as content flows into the distribution chain. It comes in one of these two formats, generally speaking, and so there's work to do to continue the evolution and moving people toward the newest versions of the standard. So we're focusing that on the community group, and then pursuing a longer-term focus on native web publications. That's what we're doing in the first one was community group, second one working group, and then to basically advance the overall web platform for the needs of the publishing industry. And eventually this bold italic one at the bottom should become true. I don't think it is. It's not there yet, but that's the missions that we hope to be accomplishing over the next several years. So a little bit on the business group. Somehow or another, I'll make this presentation available. That is a clickable link. You can go read the charter. It's fascinating reading. The business group has three co-chairs: Lisa McCoy, Kelly with Penguin Random House, Luke Adrian from Hachette, and Rick Johnson from Vital Source Ingram. And I'm going to really divert back to the thing I should have said at the beginning of this presentation when I had my name up there. These slides, credit has to go to my co-chair of the working group, Zvia Sigmund, and Karen Myers. I stole 60% of them from there and wrote 40% new. So that's my missing intro line. So anyhow, back to here. And then the W3C staff supporting the business group is Bill McCoy, who is around here somewhere, and Yvonne Herman, who was moderating the previous session. We have a steering committee of the business group, which originally was the board member, or the board members of the IDPF were the original steering committee that has subsequently been changed to be the co-chairs of all of the other publishing activities, plus a couple of additional. And the steering committee does planning for meetings and sort of drives the overall business group. But the business group has much broader participation. We have bi-weekly calls, noon Eastern generally, every 8 weeks, one in a APAC-specific time. The immediate short-term focus has been looking at the EPUB 3 roadmap and then additional task forces, which I have a slide on next, and then in parallel things like program development. The participation in the business group, which I really encourage, is you can do, even if you're not a full W3C member, the membership for that level of membership in the W3C sort of costs roughly what membership in the IDPF used to cost, so it's not huge bucks. Clearly the W3C has 70 staff that like to pay them, so the more people that get involved and actually pay at least a little bit is a good thing. So I would encourage that. And this is a picture of the task forces that we have going inside the W3C. Luke here led the EPUB Roadmap Task Force, which I think gets some sort of record for starting and finishing its process in, I believe, one meeting, which was, the community group really ought to go do this EPUB 3.2 thing. And so I suspect this will be reinvigorated when we finish that. But there's a number of other task forces going, EPUB check, accessibility, best practices, coordination with both internal and external groups. Makoto, who you've heard from occasionally here, looking at ISO standardization of our efforts, and of course accessibility. I'm going to throw a quick bone to EPUB check. Everybody that is doing anything associated with EPUB, whether it's creating it or ingesting it or putting it up for sale or rendering it, uses EPUB check somehow or another. It's developers or volunteers. We're getting, it needs more work. There is a maintenance release underway that has to happen. There's EPUB 3.2, which we'll talk a little bit about. So there's going to be, there's certainly opportunities to technically contribute to EPUB check. There will also be outbound fundraising efforts, and Bill McCoy would be your man on the money there. A little bit about the community group. Again, a clickable, not too exciting charter link. The co-chairs of the EPUB 3 community group, Rachel Comerford with Macmillan and Dave Kramer from Hachette Book Group. And what we're focusing right now is predominantly on the EPUB 3.2 development, which I'll talk a bit about, but also work on best practices, do work in GitHub like pretty much everything else that happens at W3C. We're having weekly calls now as we're really making great progress on 3.2, which explains why I will probably ditch at 5 o'clock to be on that call at 6. And the community group in the W3C, anybody can participate regardless of membership. So if this is of interest for you, come play with us. EPUB, where we are with EPUB 3, with EPUB at this point, if you're somebody who ingests EPUBs, like say Google Play Books, we get a combination, our collection of some EPUB 2.1s and some EPUB 3.01s. It's tilting more toward 3 these days, so that's somewhat progress. There is an EPUB 3.1 specification that was done sort of the last thing by the IDPF before the merger. It has had virtually no adoption, largely because EPUB Check didn't come up to speed on it. Also, it was not forward compatible with 3.01, so I'm talking a little bit more about that. But a certain quote here from VitalSource. Clearly, EPUB has advantages, especially for web consumption, which is what VitalSource does. It's reflowable, resizable, accessible, so forth. So where we are with EPUB 3.2, we envision 3.2 to be wholly backward compatible with 3.1, with 3.01, and while still incorporating the things we got right in 3.1. So we want to guarantee that any 3.01 publication will conform to EPUB 3.2. EPUB 3.01 reading systems should be able to render without modification EPUB 3.2 publications. And we want to keep the good stuff, the cool stuff that we did in 3.1 and bring that over to 3.2. And the moral of the story is this bottom bullet: EPUB 3.1 will be withdrawn and considered superseded as soon as we get 3.2 out. Now I can talk, I'm not too far behind schedule. The rationale here, as I mentioned before, 3.1 publications really haven't been sold and haven't been ingested, so we need to resolve that problem. There's a non-negligible cost to moving to 3.1 due to the change of version numbers. There's the things that we did in 3.1, introduction of WAF and SFont and so forth, we can still do in 3.2, and that's where we're headed. And then I think it's also important, this merger happened a year and a half ago now, and something should come out of the W3C reasonably soon that is a step forward in this technology, and the newest version of EPUB should really be adopted, and that's what where we're heading with 3.2. Also considering what's going on in the working group, which longer term will come up with EPUB 4, that's almost certainly not going to be strongly backward compatible with 3.2, and so with this work that we're doing, we're removing one sort of incompatible step forward on the process to get where we're going in the future. And then, as Makoto would talk about, we have had EPUB 3.01 standardized through ISO. We want to do the same thing with a newer spec, and this effort should help that along. Probably not going to beat these next couple of slides too hard, but it gives an idea of the types of things that we're doing here. There's this first 2 slides here that are some of the changes between EPUB 3.1 and 3.2. The version attribute obviously goes back to what it was before, so we can have that forward compatibility. We have relax the requirement to support foreign resources and remotely associated resources. The meta refines tag, attribute that we had in EPUB 3.01 is reintroduced, and we have removed the additional attributes that we added at 3.1 to replace refines, because by definition, these haven't really been used in practice, and we're going for that backward compatibility. The NCX is semi-back in that it's redeprecated rather than removed, and that, as much as we may hate it, there's still EPUB 2 reading systems that need the NCX in there, so you'll be able to include it along with the NAB file. Guide bindings are obsolete and deprecated but not removed. Switch and trigger roughly the same way. And so those are the changes we're making to 3.1 as we're moving to 3.2. Things that we're retaining in 3.1. I mean, Matt Garish did an absolutely fantastic job of making the spec readable. That style and presentation of the spec stays. The vocabularies, particularly manifest values, and that were introduced in 3.1, those stay. The accessibility language should largely stay. Addition of the 2 new font types stay. EPUB CFIs stay except for linking, which was never really supported by most of the rendering engines. So, but EPUB CFIs used for things like annotations clearly stays. Let's see, metadata. Let's see, is any of this worth? You can read this slide. This is the some of the remaining hype. Oh, the last one I'll probably talk to, and that we did make some changes in EPUB 3.1 to clarify the order in which encryption and compression happens in the encryption.xml, and we also added another element for that the lightweight content protection or licensed content protection needs, and so that stays. So that's really a pretty quick overview of where we are with 3.2. We're moving amazingly fast. I think we'll have drafts here. This is the site that the work's being done on. The various 3.2 drafts are clickable there. I think we'll have continued quick development over the coming weeks, and then the idea is to do a sort of longish term, couple of months. Actually, that's really fast from a W3C perspective, but a longish term review and then publish it as a community group note with the approval of the business group. There's been some discussions as whether this wants to try to become a rec track specification in the W3C. We'll see how that plays out, but real soon now we're making good progress. And lastly, talk a little bit about the Publishing Working Group, which is where the longer-term development of web publications and eventually EPUB 4 will come out of. And I just love the word specificity, so I had to put this in really bold print. But this is the goal of where we're heading with web publications. Publications with all their specificities and traditions should become first-class entities on the web. There's a lot of work to do to get there, and that's what we're working on. And the Publishing Working Group, Zvia Sigmund from Wiley, is chair. I should be in a smaller font as co-chair, in that she does way more work than I do. But it's actually a really good team because Zvia's from Wiley, cares passionately about journal publications, academic publications, and these things are going to be unbundled in the future and living on the web. And I'm with Google, and I kind of care about selling, romance novels and, not only romance, but trade press stuff. And those are going to be packaged and ingested by, our reading systems. And so between the two of us, we care about the whole gambit of what's going on in the web publishing world. And Yvonne Herman is our esteemed staff contact from the W3C, charter websiter here. Again, we have weekly working group calls. The work is done in GitHub. We have a face-to-face meeting, a technical face-to-face meeting coming up in 2 weeks in Toronto. And for a real full-fledged W3C working group, membership in the W3C is required. But if you were previously an IDPF member, there's this TPI, transitional membership that exists for another 8 or 9 months or so. So that's, again, I encourage participation with our group. If we're looking at web publications, what are we trying to accomplish? It's a whole laundry list here. I think, clearly publications need to be addressable such that you can find the root of a publication on the web and hopefully wander around and see the whole thing. The one that I view, or the next two I think I view as most important in this is, websites exist and you go from one to another and you hunt around through links, but there's not a concept of sort of the bounds of the web. It's just you go where you want to, whereas a publication is a bounded thing. And so the ability to specify the components of a web publication such that you might be able to go next page, next page, next page, and eventually get through the whole thing, but stop at the end. Or maybe search, but only search that publication. So the concept of components and the sequence is very important to the work we're doing, and a lot of the sort of stress we're having in the technical discussions are around these two topics, clearly metadata, personalization, annotations, and then lastly, the ability, one thing the web isn't perfect at now is, okay, I have this sort of tree of web pages. Well, I'd like to take it offline. Well, quite how you do that without snarfing the whole web onto your hard disk, and that comes back to the boundaries, which the idea is for web publications to be offlineable. Then we take all that cool stuff, and eventually we get to packaged web publications, which is closer to where we are with EPUB 4 today, or excuse me, EPUB 3 today, where there's we've done less definition here than we have done in WP thus far. What the actual packaging will be is not clear yet. There's some interesting work led by one of my compatriots at Google called Web Packaging, which is being done at both at the W3C and the IETF. We may be going that way. And whether, when we finally get around to defining what EPUB 4 is that the same as packaged web publications? Is that still in a zip package? There's just lots of things we haven't decided yet, and we'll be working on over the next year, certainly. And last, I think this is the last slide. I encourage people to come and join. The mailing list to keep track of what's going on is public. Participation via W3C membership certainly encouraged. Lots going on. Okay, I was going to say it's pretty exciting stuff, but it might not be exactly exciting. It's, I think, forward-looking, interesting, and I think we will have industry impact over time. So I don't know how much of my time maybe not terribly over. There's two, I don't know if there's questions, we might be able to do them now, but there's two other speakers and maybe questions after. I don't know what is best. Yeah. Yes. Annotations, web annotations, yes, that was the question. All right, well, I'll hang around, and if there's questions after the next two, that'd be great.